Alright, let's talk about top quilt design. About a year ago, maybe a little bit, maybe a year and a half ago actually, I guess, I posted a video to YouTube about how to make a top quilt. Well, one of the most common questions I get on that video is regarding the design. What this video is going to be, because I get the question so often, is talk about how I make my quilts. I do all my quilts the same for both myself and for people I make them for. But we're going to make it nice and clear with drawings for you. It was the one thing that I think was lacking in that previous video, and I think that's why I get a lot of questions about it. Okay, so when you get your material, you're going to order it by the yard. You're going to order it in rolls. I'd recommend getting 2.5 yards of material at a minimum per side of the quilt. So if you've got different colors for the quilt, so if say you got black on the inside and green on the outside, you're going to get at least 2.5 yards of green and at least 2.5 yards of black. Ideally, you'll get 3 yards. Most places will only sell it to you by the yard anyways, and you can't buy a half yard. So just order 3 yards of each. That's more or less how much you're going to need for the actual shells of the quilt itself, as well as the foot box, and it'll even leave you a little bit extra for the stuff sack for the quilt. Okay. Now, when you get that 3 yard section, here's what you're going to do. You're going to trim off the salvage, so on each side. That's probably going to be 60 or maybe 62 inches wide. You're going to trim off the salvage on either side. That's going to be about an inch or an inch and a half off from each side. So you're going to end up with a piece roughly 58 plus or minus an inch or two in width. Okay. Sorry for metric folks. I'm going to talk strictly in inches for this video here. Now, the height. So again, this is going to be 3 yards. 3 yards. You want to trim this down to whatever height you are. So if you're 2 yards high, so if you're exactly 6 feet high like I am, you're going to trim this down to 72 inches, which equals 2 yards, which equals 6 feet. Okay? That's how long you're going to make your quilt, with the raw material for it. You want your quilt to go from, you want your final quilt to be at least up to maybe about your nose. That way you have enough room to kind of tuck half your face in if you get really cold at night, or you've got enough room to cinch it around your shoulders and snug onto your neck. Okay? And the reason you make it as tall as you is because a couple of inches are going to be used, maybe an inch on either side, for seam allowances as you're sewing it, and also roughly, depending on how much loft your quilt's going to have, I would say between 4 and 6 inches are going to be needed for for the lofting on the quilt. Now you've got 2 pieces of fabric. They're going to be in this direction as wide as the roll is, minus the salvage edge, and in this direction it's going to be your height. Now, how do you figure how to taper this thing? Some people do like to taper the whole thing, and I've done that before. However, I much prefer to taper it only these corners like this. So now let's talk about that. So again, here's your piece of fabric. You're going to come up 1/3 on either side and make a mark. So if you've got a total length of 6 feet, you're going to come up 2 feet. That's where you're going to start your taper, and you're going to come in like this. Okay. Now let's talk about how wide to make that portion there. So how far in this direction are you going to come in with your taper? That's going to depend on the size of your foot. Okay. Your circular foot box is going to be the diameter of that is going to be the length of your foot plus 1 inch. So, and then of course your raw material for it, you're gonna want to add another inch on top of that for your, at least another inch for your seam allowances. If you got a 1/2 inch seam allowance, you need to add an additional inch to that height. So if you so say your foot is 12 inches long, your rough material, your rough cut for your foot box material is going to be 14 inches because it's going to be 12 inches plus 1. It's 13 plus 1 more for seam allowance. So 14 inches in diameter, and then you're going to have to calculate. You have to calculate the circumference, which I believe is just the diameter times pi. So in our case here, if you have a 12-inch foot, you're going to do 14 inches times pi. That's going to equal the circumference of your circle. That is how wide you're going to make this here. So for ease of math, let's say that you are 60 inches wide up here. Okay? And let's say your circumference of your foot box is 40 inches. That means you want this area here to be 40 inches. The difference between the height, the width at your head end and your foot end is then 20 inches. You're going to divide that 20 inches by 2 and take that from each side. So half of 20 inches is 10. So you're going to come in 10 inches from either side. Does that make sense? Then you have 10, 40, and 10. This isn't drawn to scale, obviously, but that's how far in you're going to draw your taper. So in our example here, you've got 2 feet on this side, which is 24 inches, and then 10 inches here. You're going to make marks, and you're going to draw a straight line. That's how you're going to do your taper. I hope that makes sense. If it doesn't, I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. Just contact me via messages on YouTube, or just drop a comment down below, and I'll get around to answering you. Once you've done all that math, all that figuring, you're gonna have something that basically looks like that. It's now time to lay out your baffling. This is the easiest, simplest way to do it. And honestly, I've done the painstaking math where I've tried to make all the different baffles the same size, the same volume of down. It doesn't really matter. If you just do it like this, you're going to end up with a great quilt. It's going to function perfectly, and on top of that, it's going to be really quite easy to make. There's going to be very little math involved in making it. Okay, this is how I did it in the video. I think maybe since I've done that video, quilts that have made sense, I've actually preferred to make the squares a bit smaller. So it's just a personal preference, but if you want bigger squares, just do when you lay out your grid for your baffles, just do less columns and rows. If you want even smaller squares, do more columns and rows. It's completely up to you. What I'm going to recommend you start with is 6 rows and 5 columns. That seems to work really, really well for me. Okay, so to draw, so you're going to draw out your grid with 6 rows like this, 6 equally spaced rows. Remember, your baffle comes up 1/3 of the way, so you're going to have 2 rows below your baffle, and you're going to have 4 above. Okay, and then you're going to do 5 columns. Now you're going to do your middle column is going to be perfectly straight. So you're going to divide your width at your head end by 5 and make those marks. So you've got 1, 2, 3, 4 marks. It's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sections. Your middle 2 are going to come straight down at 90 degrees, go all the way down to the bottom. If you want, you can slightly taper them here, but now you're getting fancy. There's no reason to get too fancy here, guys. Your next ones are going to split the difference halfway down here between this one and over here. Same over here. And you're just going to draw a straight line from your mark up here to your mark down here. It's as simple as that. Yes, I know that this box and this box are maybe slightly bigger than an area than the rest, and you know, these ones down here are a bit smaller. Don't worry about it. Doesn't make a difference at all. Okay. Now that you have your grid laid out, you're then going to go, just like I did in the video, and go 2 inches up from each of the intersections. 2 inches up, 2 inches down, 2 inches to the right, 2 inches to the left, and do that all the intersections. And that area there, from the middle of that intersection up to that mark, is going to be where there's going to be no baffling. Okay, and then from this mark to the next one here, that's where you're going to put your baffling. And you're going to do it all the way around. You can elect to go 3 inches in from the edges if you want. However, in practice, it doesn't seem to make a difference. You can just go 2 inches from the edges. How much down do you put in, and how thick do you make your quilt? To answer those questions, I think you're better off Googling it or looking through the different forums that are available for making your own gear, such as backpackinglight.com and hammockforums.net. People have come up with rules of thumbs. Okay, I'm happy to share with you my thoughts and what works for me, but you're better off going into the more detailed descriptions, more detailed discussions, and asking yourself, do you sleep cold or do you sleep warm? What where are you going to use this quilt? How cold do you need to go down to? How, these are the questions that really are going to be specific to the use of the quilt and to you yourself. For me, it's pretty simple. For a summer quilt, I make my baffling about 1.5 inches thick. Okay, for a quilt that I want to go well below freezing, I'll make my baffling 3.5 inches thick. And I've also got one that's in the middle that's about 2.5 inches thick. Okay, so for me, oops, oh, I don't know what's going on here. For me, summer, 1.5 inches thick baffling. That's after your seam allowances. So obviously you cut your baffling to 2 inches thick, and then you have, about 1/4 inch of seam allowance for baffling. That's what I tend to use. For mid temp, 2.5 inches. For low temp, winter, actually that's what we'll say. Winter quilt, 3.5 inches. Now you can go to one that's 4.5 if you want something that goes down to like 0 degrees Fahrenheit, or well below, -10, -20 Celsius. 4.5 or 5 inches. That's going to require a lot of down to loft that up. Okay, now you're going to have to do a bit of math to figure out how much down to put in. So you decided how much loft you want. Whether it's 1.5, 2.5, 3.5 inch thick baffles, you made that decision. You're gonna have to calculate the area of your quilt. Here's what I would do if I was you. Don't worry about the taper. Just don't. Don't try. You can obviously do the math and you can subtract the area of those tapers. It's not hard to do. It's not hard to figure out the area of a triangle and then times that by 2. But there's just no need to figure out the proper amount of down. All you need to do is get your width times your length. So your width, that's a W there for width, L here for length, and then you also need to know your desired loft. So you're going to go width times length times your loft. Okay, so if your width here is 60 inches, your length is 72 inches, and your loft is 2.5 inches, that's going to equal 10,800 cubic inches. That's how many cubic inches you need to fill. Now, that's not how much down. You don't want to put enough down to fill that in. You want to add to that another 25%. Sorry, 25%. Okay? You've already got more than you need because you've got these triangles here. Most people say, a 30 or 35% extra. We'll do 25 because we've already got extra volume accounted for from these triangles. So add 25%. So we're going to times that by 1.25. And our magic number for this hypothetical quilt is 13,500 cubic inches. Whatever that number is for you, depending on your width, your length, and your desired loft, you need to get this number. So all that times plus 25. Now let's make that really simple for you. The equation you want to use is your length times your width times your loft times 1.25. That equals cubic inches that you need to fill. Now we need to convert your desired amount of cubic inches into ounces of loft that you need to buy. Okay? So, we're going to go back to the hypothetical quilt that we're building, which requires, we know we want a volume of lofted down. The rating of down means how many cubic inches 1 ounce of that down lofts up to. So if you've got 800 down, 1 ounce of that down is going to loft up to 800 cubic inches. Okay, so if the quality of down you're buying is 800, which is pretty typical, what you want to do is divide your desired volume of loft by 800, or whatever rating down you're buying. So in our case here, we want 13,500 lofted cubic inches of, is our what we're looking for. We're going to divide that by 800 because in this scenario we're using 800 fill power down, and we get 16.875 ounces of down. So essentially 17 ounces. All right. In this example that we're doing here, a 2.5 inch loft will generally get me down to roughly 20 to 25 degrees, depending on how much clothes I'm wearing. 17 ounces plus about a 5-inch shell, that's going to equal about a 22 ounce quilt that will get me down to 20 degrees. That's pretty good. I know that was a bit messy. I know that was maybe a bit ugly. But again, if that wasn't enough, please comment down below with your questions, and I'll be happy to answer them, or even just flick me a message, and I'll also get around to answering those as well.